You're listening to the Australian Hunting and Beyond podcast with Matt, where we talk about hunting, shooting, fishing, camping, and everything else that the great outdoors has to offer. Let's get into it. Exciting news for you all. Croak Camp 2025 is a go. So you might have seen the socials on the weekend and noticed that I'm organising a camp for listeners to get together with a bunch of like-minded, good people and chase those awesome croaking fallow around a New South Wales state forest down south in April. If you are interested, make sure you get in touch. Anyways, this episode is a cracker, just like Rick's stag, which could be one for the record books. So, let's get into it. All right, I'm excited about tonight because this one's been a long time in the making, but you are a very busy man to get a hold of, just jet-setting around, hunting everywhere. Rick, how are you? Thanks for coming on. And, mate, I can't wait to hear this story about you getting this rhubarb.
Thanks again for having me on, Matt. Appreciate it. Yep, always keeping busy. Wouldn't have it any other way, I don't think.
Mate, so we do have a lot of international listeners. So I just wanted to clarify what a rhubarb is before we get into the story. So for those people who might not be familiar with the term, it is a cross between a sambar and a rusa. So they are quite a fantastic looking animal in my opinion, because some of the, I guess, different varieties of antlers that come from them is pretty cool. I've seen one with an antler on one side being sambar and pretty much pure, and then on the other side being a rusa. Yeah. So they're pretty cool damn animals, that's for sure. And, mate, this is a great story. I've sort of got little bit snippets of this, but I'm keen to hear the whole thing tonight. And it's even been to the point that you've written an article for the ADA magazine on it, which is going to be published very shortly.
It is, yeah. No, I enjoy writing articles, and this one was something that I took a lot of time with, and I did extend it over my normal sort of lengths of or how many words I'd use in an article I write for the magazines, but there was a lot to sort of take in because it did encompass a fair chunk of this year, pretty much from around end of February, early March through to till I think late July. I think I ended up crossing paths with him. But yeah, no, it's a pretty cool story, and I was pretty driven. He just kept playing games with me, so it kept me awake a lot. And drove my family and my friends insane, I think.
So let's start at the beginning. You obviously have access to a private block, and on that block you got a glimpse of this monster stag.
Yeah, so I remember it pretty vividly. Been down to the property, come back with a couple of memory cards, and going through most of them, you usually get 100 photos of the leaves moving and a bit of grass moving in the shadows. And there was one that I'd set up on a main sort of track that runs through the property, just sort of to catch any movement from other vehicles and that sort of tracked through to the national park and that. And it was sort of like one of the last pictures on the card, and it sort of caught me off guard. I think I was sitting on the lounge. It was about 10:30 at night, and I just seen this grainy picture of this stag walking towards me, and it sort of took me a couple of seconds to realise what it actually was in front of me. And you could just the width of it was the first thing that just blew my mind away. And I remember standing up. My wife thought I'd had a heart attack. She's like, what's going on? But yeah, I sat back down, replayed it about 50 times, and I think the first person I sent it through to was Felix, and he was blown away as well. So from that point on, it was game on. I knew I had to do what I needed to do to cross paths with this beast of an animal.
All right. So the game plan, when you saw this and went, okay, I've got to really try and track him down and chase him. What was the game plan? Was it throw out more trail cameras, try and work out entry and exit points? How'd you go about that?
Yeah, pretty much. I've been hunting this block for about 4 years, and there's a couple of common areas where the stags sort of hang out at certain times of the year. This was quite early in the season. I don't sort of get too much movement through the block or in early early part of the year when it's a bit warmer, for whatever means where they go, whether they go right over the other side of the property and up into the escarpment, or they just move completely out of the area, who knows. But once it gets to sort of close to the Roosa rut around sort of end of April, May, you sort of start seeing a bit more movement coming through. Then June, July, it's full on through to about end of August. A lot of movement going on. But we had a lot of rain, as you know, throughout the year, and the block was quite wet, and there was a couple of rooster coming up on the cameras, which they sort of vacated the block after a couple of years because it went real dry. Then this year was a lot more wetter. So plan was to chuck a few more cameras out on areas where I thought they might sort of frequent and try to cover a lot more of the block because it's around 6,000 acres. A lot of it's quite hard to track through. It had the bushfires go through, then floods come through, so it's copped a fair flogging over the years. And the areas where I sort of concentrated on over the previous years, I had pretty good success. I didn't really need to venture too much further up into the thicker stuff, in the steeper stuff as well. So what I did was I sort of kept pondering over Google Maps, as you do, and working out areas where, because it's quite like Google Maps wasn't updated all that often. It still had all the old buildings that were there from the fires and whatnot. So it was hard to gauge what country was what after the fires, but I sort of got a feel for an area where I thought it was just too thick. But once I tracked through it, there's a lot of dogwood, so there's a lot of clear areas, a lot of big bunches of lantana in it. And I thought this was probably be an area where I thought they might sort of be a bit more prevalent in, as opposed to the normal open grassed areas in the late afternoons, or the sort of thicker native stuff up the back, where all the trees get absolutely smashed. This area where the dogwood is surrounded by a lot of areas with a lot of wattle that they love smashing, and the cherry wood as well. So I placed a lot of cameras around that area, and also on some lead-in positions around the perimeter of the block that sort of leads out to the neighbouring blocks, because the rest of it's all covered by either the river or national parks. So that was the game plan, just to try and get as many cameras up as possible and just try and work out a bit of a game plan. Because as you know, like especially with Sambar, they don't stick to the same formula every day, as opposed to sort of like your fallow and your reds to a certain extent, where Sambar just do what they do. You think you worked them out, and next time you go down there, it's just none of that happens again. And that's my big affliction with Sambar, because it's just so unpredictable. It's never the same thing every time you go down there. And as I said, I've been hunting this block for 4 years, and I'm down there quite regularly. I take the family down there. Every time I think I've got it worked out, you go and sit in the spot thinking, yep, they were here a couple of weeks over a space of time, and then just won't see a deer, won't see anything. And then you'll be in a new area that you've never been through before, and all of a sudden you'll bump a decent stag or a hind with a yearling, or there's a little mob. It's 2 hinds and 2 yearlings, and then they have a little, looks a bit older, and they're always together. I think I posted up on one of my pages when the little fella was having a play around in the mud one time on a wallow. It was a pretty cool video, and they were there for ages. I think I got, it would have been about 8-10 minutes of footage of them just playing around in the mud, and the mother's just looking at them just going, what the hell is this kid doing? But it's one of those blocks where it's got a lot of good quality animals on it, but it's whether or not it's just a pass-through block, or certain times of the year they set up shop and then they just move off for a couple of months. So, yeah, that was the game plan, just to try and get as many cameras out, try and work out a bit of a pattern, then try and put myself in a position to hopefully for him to make a mistake.
So you've got your different trail cameras everywhere. Did you start capturing images of him? Did you set them to video and start to get a bit more of him so you knew he was still there, you had a reasonable idea of what he was doing?
Yeah, so it became a game of cat and mouse. So I think there was a couple of times where I'd been down there and then went back a week later or 2 weeks later, and he'd literally come through the exact same camera an hour or two before, hour or two after I'd actually reset the camera. I remember I took the dogs for a walk and my son, and we checked the camera down towards the riverbank, and I went back a week later, and he was literally in there 2 hours after I'd been there in daylight, 5 o'clock in the afternoon, full daylight, sniffing around where the dog had actually walked through. He was sniffing the exact log, because I remember that the dog was having a sniff on that log as well. and then he just sort of meandered off. So, that become a bit of a pattern. So I'd go set these cameras, and he'd come up on one or two of them every week or two. So he was coming through the block a fair bit. Sometimes he'd be following through a hind once it sort of got to early June, and then I got a series of pine trees on the block, and they get a lot of attention from all the stags. These guys have been rubbing on these pine trees for years, and like to the point where they're worn all the bark off, and it's some sections are like it'd be over 6 foot tall, that they've just completely stripped the bark off a pine that's at least say 60, 70 centimeters in diameter. So he'd come and visit that quite regularly, and then meander off into the wallows that I've got cameras on further up into the catchment. But so it became a bit of a game of cat and mouse with him. He'd come up, say hello on the cameras. Him and another stag I call Handlebars. I think I've posted him a few times. He's got sweeping back antlers that he's been around for years, but I could never catch him out. He's a very wily old stag. He just hangs around over night time. Doesn't show his face too much of it during the day. I think I've only caught him on camera twice during the day in the last 4 years. So he's quite wily, but he's pretty cool. He's one deer I want to get to before he because he looks like he's at the end of his sort of tether. I reckon he'd probably be 8-10 years old, and he's another one that I want to catch up with. But yeah, no, this stag just kept popping up on the camera, so I knew he wasn't going anywhere. But then I hit a point at work where I was getting absolutely pumped. The boys were playing a lot of soccer, so I don't think I got down to the block for about 2 months. So moving to that part of the hunt, previous to that, I'd probably done maybe 15 trips in the space of, would have been about 3 months. So I was down there a lot, whether or not it'd be just like a quick run down on a Sunday morning. I'd finish work on Saturday night, go pack the car, up at 2 a.m. on a Sunday morning. It's about a 2-hour drive plus a little bit into the block. I like to get in early because you'd have to pretty much track through one of the clearings to get to my little cabin, let everything settle, and then start my hunt from there. And it was to a point where even when I'd go stay down there, I wouldn't have a fire. I'd turn all my lights off, and then I'd use my red light when I was getting ready in the morning because I didn't want any chance of disturbing if he was going to come anywhere near the clearings or near the cabin or anywhere where he might even catch a glimpse of me and my movement. So it became a real sort of head game because he was on my mind all the time. If I wasn't thinking about work or the family, I was thinking about this stag, and I was either talking about it, I was ringing Felix, I was ringing another mate Cam, I was ringing Wayno, another bloke I take hunting on that block with me. And it was really getting to me because I just I put a lot of time and effort into him, and it just nothing was coming up. I didn't even catch him in the flesh. Never seen him once in the flesh until the day when our paths crossed, and I was able to take the shot. So moving on to that actual day, well, my project manager gave me the Friday off, so I did a big day Thursday. Went home, got up early Friday morning, sent a heap of emails for work and for the ADA. And looking at the weather, it looked terrible. It was a full moon. There was a big southerly coming through for a couple of days. So it wasn't really good hunting conditions per se. But I had the time off, so I wasn't going to waste it, whether or not I just go down and check the cameras or I'll try and find him. So I got down there. I sort of left Sydney lunchtime, got down there. Being earlier in the year, it was sort of daylight runs out at around 5 o'clock. So I only had probably 2 hours I could kill. So I went and sat on a couple of wallows where I'd seen him come through on the cameras a few times. And nothing sort of eventuated that night. Went down, checked the cams after nightfall. And there's a couple of new stags that had come onto the block. Or they'd just grown up from the last year or two, and they'd pretty much set up residence on that wallow, but nothing come through that night. I was pretty beaten up from the last couple of weeks of work, so I went to bed quite early after dinner, and it was a terrible night's sleep because the wind was insane. 2 of the big pine trees near the cabin blew down, and every time I got up, because I can pretty much see down a nice little bit of a clearing from the cabin, you could glass that. It was such a full moon. I could glass that clearing in the middle of the night from the cabin, just things ticking over my head. Where am I going to attack it from? Am I going to do my usual route, or I'm going to go change it up a bit to try and get into a position where there was something going through in the back of my head that I needed to get to where I'd had him on a scrape once playing around, and that kept playing on my mind. And I thought, if he's going to be somewhere in this wind, he's going to be in a bit of cover, in a little bit of a gully, trying to get out of that wind, following that Errol Mason's the zone of silence. And that's where I thought where I'm going to sort of attack. So I did my usual thing where I'd track along a creek line, keep myself covered, and then it sort of opens up to a clearing, and I either usually track further around the creek line, down into the tree cover, and then back up into another section. But I thought, you know what, I might try and expose myself. I glassed that clearing for about 15 minutes, expose myself for a couple of minutes, race across the clearing, and then get up into a section where I've got another camera on a sort of like a gully cut in where they do feed out of the thick stuff and over into the clearing. Usually the hinds come out first, and then the stags come out right at the death. So I checked the camera, and then he had been through probably about 3 days earlier, chasing a hind back up towards one of the wallows. So this was game on. So the heart rate started going through the roof a bit, because I just had that feeling that something was going to happen, and I couldn't hear anything because the wind it was literally, I reckon it was probably 30, 40 knot winds. It was insane, the amount of wind that was coming through that morning. A couple of branches were snapping left, right and centre. It wasn't the best conditions to be out there, but I was only probably about 100 metres from his little preach tree, where I'd seen him on cameras a couple of weeks before. So it was all hands on deck. Binos were out. Every step I was glassing, trying to push it, because it's really thick dogwood and the cherry wood. It's really hard to sort of try and pick up a bit of movement. So you sort of have to take a step, and then as soon as you step, you'll open up a little bit more openings in the dogwood. And I worked my way up, and I got to the preach, and I looked down and looked like a couple of fresh hoof marks and a little bit of new mud up on the preach tree. I'm like, there's something's been in here the last couple of days. So all of a sudden I copped a whiff of him, a whiff of a stag. It's unmistakable, the smell of a sambar stag or a stag that's in rut, especially on this block. I've smelt it plenty of times before, and I knew he was close, or something was close, whether or not it was him or one of the other stags on the block. Something was very close. So I sort of bent down near the camera that's on that scrape, and as I went to reach out for the cam, I caught a little bit of a movement in the corner of my eyes. I'm like, different to all the trees going nuts in the wind. I'm like, what is that? Then all of a sudden I could see his antlers. His head was sideways, and he was thrashing on a lantana bush. I'm like, time just stopped there for a couple of seconds, and I'm like, and then it registered what it was. I'm like, this is him. This is him. He's 40, 50 metres in front of me. I'm like, this is, I had the wind screaming in my face, so he had no idea. As he sort of moved a little bit further towards me, started thrashing another little sapling, so he had no idea. And I'm literally, I thought it was 40 metres, but once Felix come into the block and we stepped it out a bit, I think it was less. I think it was only about 25, less than 30 metres where he was thrashing the tree. So sort of bent down. I clipped my gun off my KUIU gun sling, and I sort of tried to find a hole in the lantana that was it wasn't a big bush, a lantana, but it was big enough to sort of cover up a little bit of my movement. So I was trying to pick a line, and I couldn't get a line on him where I'd get a bead on it, on the actual animal. So I just put the gun on a gap, and I was just hoping that he'd walk over into it. And it literally felt like an eternity. Probably only maybe 10, 15 seconds before he decided to take a couple of steps towards me, which put the crosshairs on his chest. Now, I've been told by a lot of old hunters, don't try the front on shot. It's a low percentage chance, but I was in a position where he wasn't going to turn sideways between the distance between me and him. He was on a game trail, and all I had in front of me was the crosshairs, the chest, and I aimed towards the right side of it, or his left, which I know the heart is a bit further on the left-hand side, and I squeezed off around, and it hit him, and in the telltale heart shot where they rear up, they do the bunny hop, and I thought I've hit him, and he's just ran straight at me, and I freaked. I'm like, holy dude, I've cycled another round, and he literally walked, he ran. I could have reached out and touched him. I could smell his breath. I could hear him under heavy breathing, and he just ran straight past me. I put another one into him, but I didn't really need to. And then he fell 40 meters behind me. And it was that point in time where I put the gun, I unclipped the bolt, put the gun down, and I just sat there and just put my hand in my head and had to think about the whole process and the last 5-6 months of dedicating every sort of waking moment that I could to this animal. And it all happened. And I think I sat there for about 5 minutes before I got up and walked over to him, because I just savored that whole moment, that what hunters feel like. As I say, I'll say it in the article. You do feel remorse when you pull that trigger. Once that remorse sort of passes and you realize all your efforts have come to a culminating point, and you haven't not so much won, but you've succeeded in what you've set out to do. And I still think about it now, like how it all come about. And yeah, it was a very special moment where I sat there just in my own thoughts. And then by the time I walked over to him, I sort of recorded a little bit of a video of my thoughts at that time, recorded as I walked over to him. And then I just sat with him for about 10 minutes before I messaged a few guys saying that the beast was down, because a few guys knew that I was actually in there that morning chasing him. So I let those guys know first. And then I rang Felix because I knew he wanted to come out and share the moment with me. And thanks again, Felix, for your time again. But I think he was blown away as well when he walked through the scrub and we started the efforts of butchering him and caping him out.
Man, that's just unreal. It's great to hear like such a long pursuit of this animal and the time and effort. How many hours do you reckon you put into this?
Earlier on, I was doing sort of a day and a half down there, where I'd do probably 4 hours in the morning, 4 hours in the afternoon. So you're doing 12 hours in a weekend. I reckon I would have done that for the first 8. So that's probably about 100 hours there, and then sort of dwindled off a bit. I reckon probably anywhere from 130 to 150 hours in the bush. And then you add up all the time of going through all the trail cams, going over Google Maps. So yeah, I reckon it'd be well close to 200 hours of time. And then you think about the times you're laying in bed, not sleeping, thinking about this animal. And I'd get up and then I'd watch the video again on my phone of the trail cams from the last trip I've done down there. But yeah, it's something that I tell people that are new to deer hunting and stalking, who are getting a bit down and they're not getting successful. So, and I keep saying to them, it's hours and hours of disappointment. It's hours and hours of learning from your mistakes, and it all comes to one point where it all happens. And because what you're actually calculating on, because the big stags don't get big from being silly. They're a smart animal, and all you're waiting for is them to make a mistake. And you need to be in the position and capitalize on that mistake majority of the times, especially if there's not much pressure on the area. It's sort of, they do their own thing. They don't sort of avoid certain areas because they're getting a lot of pressure. So these guys just have free range on this block. The landowner doesn't actually live on there. So a lot of the activity comes from either people illegally being on the block or myself and my family being down there. So it was a lot of time and effort into that one animal. And I'd passed up on a couple of stags that I'd seen that come up in the crosshairs. There was one that I sort of earmarked for a mate to harvest, and he popped up in front of me, and he's quite a handy stag. I reckon he'd be good 28, 29 inches, might be even pushing close to 30. He's only young, so he's got a lot of development, but he's a really nice, even stag. And he come up, and I was very tempted, because this was sort of like probably just before I went into that heavy workload 2 months out. And I rang my mate that I'd earmarked him for, young Wayno, because he's had a couple in front of him, and he's had a few mishaps where it just hasn't all worked out. And I really want to help him get his first stag, because he's spent a bit of time in the bush with me out there. But I rang him and said, mate, I know where he is. We went back there that afternoon, and sure enough, Samba being Samba, no, he wasn't there. Didn't make tracks through there. We sat there for a few hours, and I don't think I think I've seen him probably 3 or 4 times since on the cameras over the past probably 4 months now. So that's sambar hunting for you. Or in this case, rhubarb, because he has a lot of sambar traits. I'll probably sort of go into that a bit more detail if you want in regards to like the science behind how they determine it's a sambar or it's a rhubarb, because I went through a fair bit of it with some of the scorers from the ADA, because his skull length is in sambar land. So I think a rooster only maxes out around 13.5 inches. This guy was 16 inches, so he's up into that sambar range. The sutures on his skull as well. So sambar generally has a sort of a high sort of Y, where the sutures sort of match on the middle of the skull and then out to the coronets. This sort of makes a little Y, where a rooster has a deeper sort of V with the sutures, then goes down the front of the face. So they were sambar characteristics. The size of him was definitely a lot bigger than a rooster. It's just those inner tines. That main beam shows a longer inner beam than the external beams like on a sambar. And that was sort of like the one that where everyone was saying, no, it's a rhubarb. But well, I'm going to go test the hair follicles against both species, hopefully this weekend, just to confirm a little bit further that his genetics are a lot more sambar than rooster, than other animals that I've shot on this block. A couple of the hybrids that I have shot which show a little bit more rooster genetics in them.
It's pretty interesting, the whole rooster sambar thing, because are you finding on the area that the sambar are pushing the rooster out?
It's hard to tell, because the rooster are a lot more aggressive than the sambar, and from what I've heard from other guys that have both animals on the block, the rooster are quite aggressive towards the sambar. I found with this one, I think it was just because it got a bit dry, because there's quite a nice swampy areas around the wallows and where the creeks sort of flood the clear areas, and it creates a lot of muddy sort of areas which the roots are like. And it sort of dried up a bit. There was an area where I shot my 30-incher a couple of years ago, and we call it the Sambar Bowl, and it was just a wet, muddy, swampy area down towards the creek line, and they were always in there, especially around the middle of the year. And when it dried up, I'd been back down there a few times, and there's no sign in there, no sign in there over the last couple of seasons. So whether or not the rooster move out because it's not wet enough for them, not swampy enough for them, who knows? It's hard to sort of gauge, and it's a different sort of block to most people that hunt sambar or rooster. So it's hard to tell from my experience what sort of made one species more prevalent than the other. But the sambar are such a bigger deer than the rooster, and they've sort of set up shop. There is quite a few rooster hinds that just stay as residents. They don't sort of move out too much. But this year I had a lot more rooster stags, quite handy looking stags, come back onto the block, which haven't come up on the cameras for a couple of years. So it's exciting, but I haven't seen any for the last probably 3 times I've been down there since I got back from New Zealand.
It's funny, I keep hearing from people that have both that they feel sambar stags, just pure size difference is they just muscle them out. And that's where you start to get that genetic crossover. Yeah, which is pretty unreal, the fact that we've got both here that are thriving in the Australian bush, and you do have that crossover between the species as well. So
I've put forward a thing out to some of the guys from ADA in regards to possibly creating our own subspecies of the cross genre, because it's going to keep happening. There's a lot more sambar pushing up into rooster country. They're going to push further up into Port Macquarie area. So all these hybrids are going to keep these big hybrids are going to keep popping up. So it's something that I sort of want to try and put a bit of time and effort into, and try and get a scoring system that would recognise the hybrids. Not purely for the fact that I've shot a good quality one, but the fact that it's going to happen, and we're going to have to sort of recognise these hunters that do target the hybrids, because they are a pretty cool animal, because you're getting the best of both worlds, and the meat off them is exceptional compared to the sambar quality of meat on this block is exceptional. They've got good feed. But I found this fella had, and considering they were in the middle of the rut, it is exceptional table fare. And there's no doubt about that. So there's something I really want to push, is try and get this, whether or not the ADA want to do it or somebody else wants to recognise it. But I think we need to create a scoring system to recognise these hybrids, and possibly even try and get a subspecies recognised in Australia as like a Australis species of deer.
Very cool just to think it could be one of the only places that this happens.
Yeah.
And it's occurring naturally. It's not as if you're genetically trying to alter them on a farm or for whatever reason, which I know has happened on obviously deer farming and trying to grow, trying to get antler growth and things like that. But this is just nature being nature. So I find that just fascinating and amazing. And they are a cool looking animal. I've had a couple of photos sent to me. And as I was talking about before, the 2 different antlers on the one animal.
Was that the one on Clark McGee's?
Cool. No, block? It wasn't. No. I know he has a few, but no, just a mate. He's in the suburbs, to be honest. Yeah. And they said, this is out the back of our, suburban home. And it was such a cool looking animal. But yeah, pretty fascinating.
It is, yeah. And it's something I want to pursue. So stay tuned.
No, I like it. All right. So we held off recording about that for a bit because you had a awesome sounding New Zealand trip coming up.
Yeah.
And we said, listen, I want to hear it, but I do want to hear the next adventure too, because you were over in NZ for quite a bit there chasing a variety of animals. So let's have a chat about how that went.
Yeah, cool. So I've got a mate, most of you guys know Brett Gray's up in the Northern Territory, chases buff, and we've become good mates, good hunting buddies. I go up there yearly and chase buff and pigs and that with him. And we had the idea to do an NZ trip because I'm fascinated by tahr. I reckon they're a really cool animal. And Brett had done New Zealand before and shot a really nice chamois, but hasn't got a tahr. So I said, all right, well, let's try and tee this up. And we've got a good mate that used to do a bit of guiding with Brett up in the Territory, Madison, and he runs NZ Taxidermy. I sort of runs it for the owner, lives on site, and it's one of the coolest places I've ever been to. Like, we spent a couple of nights in there when we first got there, and it's just, you've never seen so much bone in your life, and quality bone. And just the setup they've got there, and you can see why they're the biggest in the Southern Hemisphere. But we sparked this idea probably, I think we planned for about 16 months from when we sort of, the inception of the idea. We booked tickets nearly 12 months out. As soon as the sales come up at Christmas time, we booked our tickets, and then we started the ball rolling, which is, as you know, with New Zealand now, it's quite a lengthy process. It's up to 5-6 months to get all your paperwork through and get it approved. So that gave us plenty of time to sort of work out exactly what we wanted to do. But being New Zealand and we wanted to do the West Coast, being the West Coast of New Zealand, there's only one thing that just isn't something you can count on, and that's the weather. So we'd done all the planning. Brett and I were on the phone pretty much every day. Especially, it was driving my wife insane because every night sort of Brett had put his newborn down and we'd spend an hour or so on the phone just going over bits and pieces, and the excitement kept growing over the lead up to it. And then when the day finally came where Brett had to fly down, he spent a night here in Sydney, and he had a bit of a cough when he first got here. Then we got over to Queenstown and it was like, I think it was nearly -2 or something when we flew into Queenstown. But the whole journey was, it started out funny on the morning when we got to customs at the Sydney International Airport, because we'd done all this planning. We ticked all the boxes. We double checked all the boxes. We had all our ducks aligned. So we get into customs, walked into border control, into border force, and there's one guy in there and he's like, what are you guys here for? We're like, we're flying in New Zealand this morning and we just need to do our export of our rifles so we can take them on our flight with us. He goes, nah, not happening this morning. What time's your flight? We're like, it's 9:15. We were there at 6 o'clock in the morning, so we're well over three and a quarter hours to get to get it all sorted. And he goes, nah, not going to happen this morning. We're like, why? He goes, nah, just you should have got here earlier. I don't know how much earlier you wanted us to be here, but this is about as early as we can get here. And then he goes, have you got this? Have you got that? We ticked all the boxes. Then he goes, have you got your actual registration of the firearm? I said, no, well, we didn't need to. We just email it through. He goes, no, you need it. So, well, can I email it to you and you print it out? He's like, yeah, no, that's fine. So it literally took us about 15 minutes to get this whole process done. But we found out from the guy that escorted us down to Air New Zealand, down to the sporting goods and oversized luggage bit, that ADF were going to bring through like 90 blokes later on that morning. They were coming back into the country, and they had to go through the whole process of getting all their rifles checked. So he was a bit freaked out because he was the only one on, and 2 guys were on leave. So he was freaking out a bit, but we got through that process. All went smoothly with Air New Zealand. I took quite a fair bit of luggage over because I had 2 weeks after our hunting trip to do a couple of weeks around the South Island in a motorhome, doing a bit of spearfishing, a bit of fishing as well. So I had a big sport tube, I had my gun case, I had a big bag of gear, and then I had my carry-on. So I had nearly 70 kilos of gear I was taking over with me. So we got that all checked in. As usual, Air New Zealand's really good. Get into Queenstown, everything went fine with customs in New Zealand. They picked apart every grass seed out of my bino harness, cleaned my boots a bit better than what I did for me. All the rifles went through. We talked to the customs guys, and they were all into hunting as well, as everyone is in New Zealand. And then we exited out, met up with Madison, and then go to hunting and fishing. And then I'm walking around hunting and fishing, and I'm like, where's my big camera? So instead of using a spotting scope, I use a large camera with a big zoom on it. I'd actually left it at customs in Sydney, and I'm freaking out. Rang Air New Zealand, rang customs, rang International Airport in Sydney, and long story short, my wife picked up my camera on my way through because customs handed it into lost property. And when I come out of the Remarkables a week and a half later, I had an email saying that they possibly have found my camera. So my wife picked it up and brought it over when she flew over 10 days later. So it all worked out in the end, but it would have been nice to have my nice big camera there to take some cool footage and that. But everything was done off the phones and through Madison's spot and scope. So that was a bit of a hiccup on our journey getting over there. And then sure enough, the weather was absolute pear-shaped. We were staying just south of, we were staying down in Guanica for a few days, waiting for the weather to clear to get up to the choppers. But it was 3 days of absolute terrible rain, wind. We even tried going down to Lake Guanica and try and poke up into a bit of country up in there because New Zealand's just so full of opportunities. Just get on the Doc app and just find a map and open up and, I can go hunt there. So let's go for a walk in there. So we were spotting tar from the road in the binos, but it was just pissing down rain, and it's really dangerous sort of country too to be walking up and getting caught up in there. So Madison went through about 4 or 5 other plans to try and get us onto the tar. Then we finally got access to a station up near Christchurch. So we made the journey. I think it was about 5.5, 6 hour drive up into some clearer weather, and then onto the station, and then sort of track up into a nice hut that's on one of the rivers up there. So we met up with Madison's old man on the station, and then we sort of geared everything up, tried to push the cars in as far as we could because there's a lot of snow and sort of soggy ground around because it still had a fair bit of rain up there as well. We could only get in so far with the car. Then we had a one quad to get 4 of us in there. So Brett and I just pretty much backpacked. I think it was about probably 5 or 6, 7 Ks or something. I just sort of had a backpack along a track to get up over and into the hut and onto the river, which wasn't too bad because our bigger bags were sort of taken on the quad. They sort of ferried it backwards and forwards until we got into the hut. But yeah, no, that was our first taste of actually with the pack on. Was 4 days after we actually got into New Zealand. So we were in there first. We started glassing all these hills trying to find these tar, and we couldn't pick them up. Like, until your eyes get trained to seeing tar in the mountains, you just don't see them. And then as soon as Madison got in there, he sort of put the binos up and, there's one there, there's one there. Like, they were literally 900 metres, 1,000 metres away up in some pretty much dead straight up and down country. So they were pretty safe on the other side of the river. So that afternoon we sort of geared up and went for a bit of a walk, sat down, did a bit of glassing. We found a mob of nennies sort of working their way down in the tussocks. So the game plan was to go take a couple of nennies for some skins and a bit of meat. So we get up into a shooting position. We're pretty much shooting straight up. Like, I think I shot mine at 150 metres, and I was aiming at a kneecap sort of thing because it's just pretty much straight up. And she was pretty cool. Once I took the shot, Brett took a shot at the same time. We both harvested a couple of nennies, and she had a really cool coat on. It's like sort of like caribou coat, the nennies at that time of the year. So a really cool coat on it. And she had one sort of busted horn that sort of kept growing, so it sort of kicked out to the side. So really cool little trophy. Took the skull and the skin off her and the back straps, and we had them in camp that night. So that was our first animal on the ground in New Zealand, which we were pretty chuffed about. So the next day we sort of spent just glassing. We spent a whole day glassing until the late afternoon because we found a really good mob of probably around 8, 12 bulls holding a few nannies, but they were a long way up and then just in a country where you'd either have to go track all the way around, back over the top, then try and come down on top of them. Both of us not really confident in taking a 1,000-metre shot. I was doing ranging out to around 400 or 500 metres, which I was comfortable at. We went to the range before we went up to Christchurch and sort of ranged out to, I think my longest shot was about 485 metres. We pushed Brett's gun out to, I think, 625 from memory at this really cool range in the mountains where you could just take it all in. It wasn't like going to a shooting range here in Australia. It was all nice and open and had heaps of targets up in the mountains and in the snow-capped mountains around you. It was really, really pretty and really, really nice to take in. But yeah, the next day we just glassed, and then later that afternoon, it was probably we only had probably about an hour and a half, 2 hours left of daylight. I picked up a couple of tahr in the tussock line, a lot down a lot lower. But I had to track across the river and track probably 400 or 500 metres up through the tussocks and try and get ourselves into a shooting position about 300 metres out. So we ended up doing that, but unfortunately, both Brett and I shot high when we both took our shot. So we both missed on our first. They were a couple of good tahr bulls. So we were back to the hut that night, heads in our hands, feeling a bit down. Had a good feed, had a bit of a good chat with Madison and his old man, and then the wind and the rain that night was sideways. It was insane. We thought tomorrow's going to be absolutely pear-shaped. We're not really going to be able to get out hunting. By the time it all passed, daybreak, and the sun come out, but it was absolutely freezing. All the water was all crystallized around the little creeks that we're getting our water out of. It was an absolutely freezing but beautiful morning, bluebird morning. So this was our day where we were going to sort of start working our way back to the station. And then once we got to the top, we're going to work our way along and then try and come down on that herd of tahr. We had to track up a hill that was quite heavy in gradient. It took us probably a good 45 minutes to get up there. It was quite clear. I was through tussocks and then up to the snow line, track across a nice little terrace, and then we sort of sat down after we went through a bit of snow, had a bit of lunch, and we thought we'd just have a bit of a glass. And then all of a sudden we spotted on the opposite face, about 800 metres away from us, a couple of tahr just sitting bedded down in the sun. A couple of good bulls, a couple of nannies with them. So we finished our lunch and hatched a bit of a plan to sort of track around the bowl, try and come around on them and put ourselves in a position to take a shot. We left Madison's old man back on the binos and a radio to sort of tell us if anything moved or if we had to make a change in our plan. So Madison, Brett and I sort of tracked around. We dropped all our gear and just took light packs in and our rifles, tracked around. And as we started tracking around, we only got about probably 200 or 300 metres into the walk. We busted another mob of nannies below us, so probably about 300 or 400 metres below us, and they sort of started running up towards the other mob. So we're like freaking out that they're gonna bump them, and sure enough, they did. We copped a call on the radio saying that they'd moved off and moved down towards the creek line. So we sort of continued on our path to sort of see if we could cut them off. Once we sort of tracked around, it took us about an hour to get around to the other side. We picked up a couple of more tahr on another face. They were just bedded down, so we were planning on setting up and maybe having a shot at those. And then all of a sudden, Madison just told everyone to stop what they're doing and just look below us. And literally 80 metres below us, the tahr that we first seen were feeding. So we had a good wind in our face. We had an opportunity to just both pull the trigger at the same time. So we both set up, both were ready, and we both pulled the trigger. Both had shots that hit. Mine was sort of a pretty good high shoulder shot, but he didn't run that far. Brett's we could not recover, so unfortunately we couldn't find Brett's tahr, but I'd finally got my bull tahr on the ground that we'd been planning for 16 months. It all come to a really short and abrupt. I was expecting played it out in my head. I'll be taking this 500 metre, 600 metre shot across a gully to shoot my first tar, and it'd fall down a big catchment, then I'd have to go down and recover it. But how it all worked out fine, where I had an 80 metre shot on a beautiful big bull tar with a big spring coat.
How damn good.
It was something to save you.
Especially 16 months in the planning and the hours leading up to it, the anticipation, the talking. That's, it's a long time.
The money spent as well.
Yeah. Well, at least you got to tie it in with the family as well. That's a pretty good idea. Get out there, go for the hunt, and then the family come and visit and spend a couple of weeks traveling as well. It's pretty smart. Yeah,
well, we had to get back to the station, then we tracked back to Wanaka, and we had a day of rest that night, and then Brett and I made our way into Queenstown that day, and we sort of had a night out on the town just to sort of relieve a bit of stress. And Brett's chest infection was getting worse and worse. He kept me up that night coughing. Then his family were flying in the next day. So I said to him, "So what do you want to do?" He goes, "Mate, I can't hunt." I said, "Mate, if I go up into any high country where it's cold," I said, this cough's going to get worse. So I said, "Well, I've got 3 days before my family were coming over, so why don't you just drop me in the bottom of the Remarkables and I'll just do a 3-day backpack solo hunt." Remarkables is only 25 minutes out of Queenstown, so amazing country just outside of Queenstown. He dropped me in there. It took me sort of half the day to get into an area where I thought they might be, and I sat down on the creek line and I glassed up, and sure enough, there's a couple of chamois above me. So I sort of set up camp above the tree line, and they watched me. I waited for this buck to stand up. He wouldn't stand up, so I said, "Hell, I'm just going to set camp up here and wait for you to stand up." So I waited that afternoon, glassed him for a couple of hours, and he finally stood up, and I took a shot on him, and he sort of walked off. He sort of hobbled off gingerly around the bluff, and then that was the last I seen him. I said, "Well, I'll just go try and recover him in the morning." So really cold that night. I think it got down to -6, so I sort of rugged up after a bit of dinner and just watched a movie on my phone and made a plan to sort of find a way to cross the creek line, because there was a fair bit of water in the creek, and try and get up there and recover him. But I ended up shooting a nenny the next morning at about 346 metres, and they're tough little animals. I can't get over how tough these little animals are. Like, it was a solid shot out of a 300 WSM, and she soaked it up, and it took me a good 3 hours to track her and find her. Finally found her, and then I secured my second alpine animal in New Zealand. But unfortunately, I wasn't able to recover the buck that I'd shot the day before. I got up into the bluff, and it was quite sketchy sort of country, and where I thought he'd tracked around to, it sort of just come to an abrupt end, and it was just a big slip that just went over, and I'm just like, I'm not going down in there. It's too dangerous. It's only an animal, so I don't really want to put myself, especially if I'm doing it solo. Got my Garmin and in reach and all that, but yeah, it's just something that you don't really want to put yourself in that position. But it gives me an excuse to go back again.
Well, I mean, that's always a positive. But yeah. What do you think the biggest differences are between Australia and New Zealand hunting like that?
It's a lot more rugged country, I found. Like, you could probably assimilate it to Victorian high country, but just a little bit more on steroids. Some areas are really thick, but once you get up a bit higher, it's quite open in the tussock areas and the Spaniards. But it's either up or it's down. I found in a lot of that country over there, unless you've got access to the farmlands and stuff like that. But yeah, it's similar to a certain degree, but it's quite different. If you sort of know what I mean. It's something I've got an affliction with it now, so I've already started planning for next year. We're entering the Wapiti Gullet, and if I don't get in that, I'm going to go over and chase reds in the raw, and then maybe another tar hunt at the end of the year if Brett's available for it after his second is born in the middle of the year.
There's some really good international hunting over there, isn't there? Like, when you think about insane. The country, the variety that you can hunt, it's
the accessibility.
Top-notch.
The accessibility is the big thing.
Yeah. I was talking about that today because I'm trying to tee up a couple of hunts before the end of the year. It's getting warmer.
Yeah.
My only concern with public land hunting as it warms up is that those total fire bans. And, I've been caught out a few times now that I've gone down to a state forest ready to hunt, and there's been a total fire ban pop up, and as you said, you book these things out a couple of months or, at least for me, I tend to do it 4 to 6 weeks out as a minimum. You don't know what the temperature is going to do. You don't know what the weather's going to be like. And then you get down there and it's just pack up stumps, you're done.
Yeah.
So
exactly.
It's one of those tricky things. Then you look at the accessibility in other parts of the country and then over in New Zealand where you don't have to worry about that as much.
No.
So it's a really tricky one, isn't it?
Yeah. So one thing I did find about hunting in New Zealand is it's so easy to go hunt anywhere. Like I remember when I was with the family, we stopped in a place called Mairua Springs just outside of Hanmar Springs, pretty much in the middle of the South Island. And I'm looking up these, like we're sitting in the hot springs, I'm looking up these mountains. I'm like, that looks like really good hunting country. So I wonder where I can hunt. So I pulled up the dock app and I'm just going, I'm in the blue zone here. I can hunt. I can literally walk out of my cabin, cross the creek and then go hunting. And the other thing I noticed was the respect that they have for the bush over there when it comes to either just the campgrounds, the free camping areas, or the river systems, the bush. You never see any rubbish anywhere. And that's the big difference that I noticed between our bush and how we treat it or how others treat it and how the New Zealanders treat and the respect they have for their bush and their waterways. It was insane. You could not see a bit of paper flapping around in the breeze. There was no McDonald's wrappers. There was no Macca's cups in the car parks. It was insane. Like it was one thing I just go, wow, this is incredible. This is how we should be respecting our land to ensure they're not going to take it off us, because the respect they have for the country and how accepted hunting is over there. Every bar you go into has got deer heads on the wall or chamois or tar. It's such a cool place. Like I think I'm going to be planning trips over there every year from now on. It's just a really cool place.
It's funny that cultural sort of significance hunting plays over there when I talk to people from New Zealand, and compared to us, they're very different countries when it just the way we approach the cultural side of things.
Yep.
Both First Nations people in the two respective countries both have a connection with hunting on the landscape, but over there it just seems to have, I guess, overflown into the public, whereas here it doesn't seem to. But yeah, it's mainstream over there as opposed to here where it's not. And that has always sort of puzzled me as to why there is such a difference between countries when hunting has always been such a big part of both First Nation people, but yet that's embraced in New Zealand so much more than it is embraced here in Australia. Yeah,
it's hard to sort of gather sort of reason behind it, because we're two very similar countries in how, like, a lot of our schooling and our work systems and all those other parts of society. Then it comes to the hunting and fishing part, and they're two completely different entities. And I just don't get it, because we're not that far apart. We've got a lot of very similar game, whether it's in the water or if it's on the land, and we're just two completely different entities. It's quite, as you said, puzzling. It's like we need to fashion ourselves a lot more, especially with like how it's resourced and the I don't know how it's sort of set up. Like it's very similar to how the GMA control Victorian hunting, where as long as you got your game license, they're a little bit different because they'll have areas sort of cordoned off, and then you need a permit for that area. But it's not hard to get that permit. You go online, apply for the permit in the area, you get an email back saying you can go hunt there. If you don't, it's $100,000 fine if you get caught hunting in there without a permit, because it's so easy. And I even remember when I was in the Remarkables, I just finished skinning out the cape on the hind on the nanny chamois, and I looked down on the creek line. There's two young fellas down the creek line, so we sort of waved at each other in the binos, and I made my way down. I had a chat to them. These guys were 17, didn't have a car license, both had rifles with suppressors on their shoulders. Their parents dropped them in the bottom of the Remarkables in the morning, and then they come pick them up at night. And that's just, they've been doing that for, he goes, this is my second hunt without my parents. And the Remarkables was an easy country to hunt, but they do it all the time. And he'd shot a really nice, he would have been about 8.5, 9-inch chamois buck on the way in, literally probably 20 minutes away from the car park. down the bottom of near the main road. And it's just part of what they do over there. And it's something that we need to sort of embrace and sort of not so much push on our younger generation, but sort of give them the opportunity to be able to do that.
Well, you're right. I mean, if you're putting all these hurdles in place for people to get access and get out there, you're creating an issue.
Yep.
And I find with anything, the easier it is to do something, the more opportunity that people have, then it's more likely going to be done.
Exactly.
If you've got the opportunity to get out there, then you're going to do it. But if you are restricted to that, you are, there's that hurdle that's really going to impact how often you do it. Look, I put my hand up for it all the time, is that my state forest that I like to hunt, good 4 hours away. That's fine. I've got no issue with it. Love going down there, but I'm not going to be doing that to go down there one afternoon for a hunt. So then the options of hunting more often are less, which is cool. There's nothing wrong with that at all. I'd love something like that in New Zealand where you can just walk out the back door and go for a hunt. Like that I'd be out there every day.
It's so cool. It's
like, awesome.
Like you literally open up, like everywhere we stopped, I'd open up the map and if it wasn't right where we was camping, wasn't too far away. It was 100, 150, 200 meters away. You could go for a walk and go for a hunt. And it's just such a very well-oiled and efficient system. But they need the respect from the hunter's side as well to make it work. And that's what they do. Like everyone respects the fact that they've got this right to be able to go out hunting. And it's something to behold. It's something that I sort of wish that and hope that we can get to that level. So that was one of the main reasons I sort of started that Sambar Hunters page and become the president of the Sydney branch of the ADA, is because I want to try and help people get out there and show them that it is a bit of a process to get into the system. But once you get into it and you meet a few people and you join a few clubs, it sort of makes it a little bit more streamlined and makes it a bit easier and just makes it sort of part. I consider it's not a sport to me. It's my lifestyle. And I think that's sort of how the New Zealanders treat it as well. The fishing, hunting, whether it's bird shooting with the ducks and that, or if it's fishing with trout, because you can fish everywhere in New Zealand. There's so much good fishing over there as well. Then you got the saltwater fishing. We've got all that here. Why don't we have the same culture? I said, it's getting further and further away from it. And we need to harness these younger generation coming through and show them the right way, and try and push them away from these hunting with thermals and whatever, all these new laws and all the new technology that's coming through. Just go back to the roots and put a rifle on your shoulder or a bow in your hand and just get out in the bush and enjoy yourself. If you shoot something, you shoot something. If you don't, take it as a win.
I think that's that instant gratification sort of everybody wants. It's a hard one because I understand people. That's just the common nature of the world at the moment, is that everything is instant. Now, for me, I don't see hunting as instant. It's a process. And, one of the reasons I wanted you back on and to hear that story, A few people requested you to come back on and tell the story, but B, was the fact that it wasn't this instant gratification of walking out into the paddock and shooting something straight away and just going, wow, this is great. Now that happens. Some people get extremely lucky, like Tony Saros with his huge red deer that we had on last week.
Yeah.
Get it. That happens. That's just luck. But the fact that you caught him on the camera, that you went and chased him and, it took you nearly 200 hours to knock him over.
Yeah.
Man, there's a lot of respect towards not just the animal, but the whole process to do that, because there's a lot of time, effort, passion is the word that jumps to mind.
Exactly.
And it's fantastic. I love hearing about it.
Yeah. And I love talking about it as well. Like the more any chance I get to share a photo or talk to somebody about hunting or fishing, I'm more than happy to share it. And the same goes with when people approach me on social media that need a leg up in state forest hunting. Like I'm not going to hand it out to them. I'm not going to go tie a deer up to a star picket in the middle of the state forest and give him a pin. Of course, I'm going to give him a pin and say, this is where I have seen deer, or a good chance you might see him in here. But I'm not going to hand it to him on a platter. But if I can give them that little bit of direction to put them in a place where they might see some sign or even see a deer, that's going to make them go back next time, even if they're not successful. And I think trying to get away from that secret society. Because over in New Zealand, you'd talk to someone about hunting. Oh, mate, yeah, no worries. If you're ever down in my part of the country, come down and I'll take you out hunting. Like, I put up a post on one of the New Zealand hunting and fishing pages. I was inundated by offers for people to take me out hunting or fishing, whether it was chasing whitebait or sea run brown trout or hunting on public or private land. They were more than accommodating. And I see it on our pages. A Kiwi bloke put up a post today about offering shared hunts on his properties over in New Zealand, and it fell on deaf ears. There was crickets on the Australian pages. And I'm like, that's because there's only a certain amount of people in our community that are willing to help people, and it needs to be more. Because the way I look at it is, if we keep going this way, the secret society that we have in the hunting community, it's all going to get taken away from us, because we're not going to be controlling the numbers. We're not going to be showing those that are against us that we're doing something to the numbers and being productive out in the bush and controlling these numbers that they are starting to blow out. And the amount of deer. That's why I've got all these culling programs in place, albeit so inhumane how they go about it, but it's in place, and it's people that don't understand are the ones that are putting these things in place. So that's why I try to urge every hunter that I come across. Like, I see a lot of negative stuff on social media, but I'm just like, guys, he's only asking a question. I'm pretty sure when you were young and you didn't have somebody guiding you, because they might not have a dad that showed them how to hunt. They might not have an uncle that used to take them out hunting or pigging. So they've got to ask the questions. There's only so much you can learn on YouTube and on reading stuff, but you ask a question, I'm more than happy to help. Like, as long as you've got out there and had a crack yourself and you're struggling, I'll help you. I'll take you along. I won't take you to my private blocks, but I will definitely try and help you out, and I'll try and organise. That's why I organise the Sambar Hunters education weekends, and I'm pushing for more events with the ADA, because this is the only way we're going to try and stem the flow. Because there's that stat that came out the other day about how many people signed that petition for locking up the national parks. I was embarrassed, to be honest, about it.
Oh, is that the opening New South Wales national parks, and it was like we just got over 6,000. What a joke.
Dismal. Like, I don't understand. Like, one of my pages has got 4,500 members, and I know your fellow page has got over 20,000.
27, yeah. I think, thousand, and I posted in there many a time.
What are these guys doing? Like, I get it. They got access to private property.
Well, just even state forest hunters. I think I was chatting to Felix about this, and I think he did a quick Google and said there's 25,000 New South Wales state forest licenses. Now, just them alone, if you're out there slogging away in state forests on public land, fantastic, love it. Do you not want to access national parks that are these sanctuaries for breeding deer and other animals at the moment? Like, it just, I can't believe, and it literally was a 10-second process. Click on the link, put your name and an email. That was it.
Yep.
Like, I just don't understand the laziness. And that's all it comes down to. It's just lazy.
Yeah.
Because it's not something that was a massive time consuming thing. Everybody could find 10 seconds in their day. The link was there. You could do it on your phone. Man, it's just frustrating when you sit there and go, we've got these opportunities and we can't even take advantage of them through sheer laziness.
Yeah. And it's sort of like, out of all the countries where you can hunt in the world, Australia's one of the most luckiest. We can do whatever we want, whenever we want, majority of the time, and hunt whatever we want, any time of the year. We don't have any seasons in New South Wales for any deer, even hog deer. Victoria's got the hog deer season down there, but we are so lucky here. And for them to take this away from us because of just laziness and stubbornness, like, I get it, like when we had to do the submission for the deer poisoning and stuff like that. That was quite a bit of a lengthy process because you had to write a letter and all that. But this was literally, as you said, a 10-second process. Open up the link, tick the box, sign it off, send it back. And we couldn't do that. So, and I think I posted in a thing and said, well, this is what's going to happen, is the ones that are going to be whinging about it first are the ones that didn't take the time out of their super busy day to do that 10-second process. And they're the ones that are going to be whinging first.
Yeah, it's very disappointing. I mean, we can't change it now. I just hope that if things like this come back up in the future that we take action and do something because, yeah, as you said, I love what you do, hence why you're back on here and, and I joined the ADA and whatnot. So, you put things out there in a positive perspective, which I love, and try and help people along. So, mate, keep doing what you're doing. It's fantastic stuff. Before we go, I just want to shout out to Nick. Nick messages he'd never been hunting down the Snowy, so I sort of pointed him in a couple of directions for state forests and whatnot, and I'm pleased that his first day down there, he was able to knock over a fallow. So well done, awesome. Nick, mate. I'm really happy for you. So, yeah. All right, Rick. Well, mate, I appreciate you coming on again. What a fantastic story. I know everyone's going to love it, mate. Yeah, well done again. The time and dedication you put into it, as well as then being president of the ADA and running the Samba page and things like that, mate. It's truly great to see someone that is putting it out there in such a positive manner and has such a passion for what we do. So, mate, keep doing what you're doing and being that positive role model. Love it.
Thanks again, Matt. And yeah, as I said, I'll just try and do whatever I can to try and help the community, because there's been people that did it before us, like guys like Tom Mumford and all that got the public system up and running. And I want to try and ensure that my kids can go out there and do it. So if you didn't sign the petition, pity on you, but let's hope it doesn't have a negative effect on our ability to get out in the bush, because that's what it's all about.
Mate, most definitely. All right, listeners, bye for now. You've been listening to the Australian Hunting and Beyond podcast with Matt. Thanks for tuning in and can't wait to catch you next time. But in the meantime, if you want more, you can find it at linktr.ee/Australian Hunting and Beyond. That will give you our YouTube, Instagram, X, Facebook, you name it. We'll catch you next time.